All right, let's see if this works.
On more we can drop, stop it from dropping actually. Go with the dots. I believe. So. Here we go. And then we can. Type meeting controls on this computer. Yeah, and then just, yeah, there you go. Sorry, I've done this a few times.
No.
Obviously. Well, thank you all. It's really nice to see a room full of you and really wonderful to be here. And I want to thank Bill and Emily Elizabeth for their really gracious hosting of me today, being back here at Clemson. It's been a while since I've been back and I cannot make it around campus. I don't know how many of you appreciate how much this campus has changed. I enjoyed being over in the library, which I spent a lot of time in, but much of my time was out at the research park. And so getting between there and here, I don't know that I could do it today because there's so much growth and so much happening on this campus. It's really wonderful to see. I will also say that usually I don't give talks like this. I'm an engineer who does a lot of science work, but I work across a lot of disciplines and with people across disciplines. But when Bill called me and asked if I would give this talk, it was one of those moments like, you talking to me, an ethics talk. But as I really appreciate it because I've been thinking about this for a while. I've actually done some writing with some individuals who are experts in ethics research and, just kind of thinking through some experiences I've had. And so this gives me an opportunity to really bring all that together and share that with you. So I'm going to start by saying that I am not an expert on ethics, although we all in our lived experiences experience decision points where we have to make ethical decisions. I'm not a historian, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of how we and I got to where I am. So I'm really going to take you through a storyline, and I will talk to you about how the Flint water crisis kind of is really a monumental point in a process that I've been going through for a long time in terms of how we do people first engineering, or how I do people first engineering. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. We do it this way. It's not going to go. I'm not sure what's going on now. It's not moving. Stop. I can stay here actually if it's easier. I'll just do it with the. Okay, it should be the right spot. Okay. So let's take the title apart a little bit. When ethical norms collide, a viewpoint from multidisciplinary people first engineering. What I'm going to talk about today is linked in through this title, but in a different order. I'm first going to talk to you about what is people first engineering and kind of what that term means to me. I'm then going to talk about how, if we get to practicing people first engineering, it necessitates driving, working with others outside of our own discipline. I'm going to start with the word multidisciplinary, and I'm going to go from there. And then once you get to a point where you need kind of this multidisciplinary, you need people from multiple disciplines to be able to practice people first engineering. There are times when the principles and practices that come along with all of that don't align. And so that's the collision course that I talked about. And maybe that's a little strong of a term, but I am going to talk to you about how I experienced that. And it was one of the experiences during the Flint water crisis. So I will share that with you. And I'll just say up front that, as all of us, I'm human. And so this was a learning process. We all make mistakes along the way. And we hopefully learn from those mistakes because they then come back in a way where you're able to implement maybe a different approach, but certainly learn from it and help you to establish your principled norms as you go through life. So we're going to walk through this, and I'm going to start with people first engineering. And I'm going to start with what I call the in service to movement. So for me, I come to this from the following direction. I'm going to put this map up here. This is a map of the US and some of the territories, and it's a map of the land grant colleges and universities. Clemson is a land grant college and university, and if you're not familiar with what that means, the land grants came through the Morrill Act of 1862. This was actually put in place because a lot of the colleges at the time were really much more theoretical. They were teaching the classics, maybe math, Greek, things of that nature. But the vast majority of the population did not have access to that kind of higher education. And so this was a way to put money into the country and the education of the masses in the United States at the time. It was also decidedly about bringing a different kinds of educational model to bear, which was much more applied. And it really related to agriculture, it related to mathematics and engineering and sciences and things like that. So it was really trying to have practical type education and higher education and give people an opportunity to develop skills. There was an additional second Morrill Act in 1890 where additional schools were brought on, and then in 1994 where there was a recognition that many of the early schools may have, basically the federal government provided land for our schools to be established. And that land had come, in some cases, from tribal communities. And so in 1994, some of the tribal colleges were brought into this process, into this frame. So my background from an education standpoint is that I started at the University of Illinois, and I did 2 degrees there, went down to Texas for 3 years, worked in practice. I then came here to Clemson. And I was at Clemson, and then when I left Clemson, I was hired as a faculty member at Virginia Tech. So those of you who are sports fans will notice a pattern. Yes, it's orange, orange, orange. And I do love orange, but there was a point in time when I was recruited away, go blue. However, I will point out that you got Coach Bakich, who was your baseball coach, and he's awesome. He came from Michigan, and you got the better end of that deal. So I'm not going to talk a lot about my basic research. This is like the one slide I'm going to show you. I will show you a few things with the Flint work, but that'll be very applied. So I work in a lot of different areas, and I got here because I tend to follow my students. So my students come in and they're excited about something, and I'm a perpetual student. So I'm like, well, let's go pursue that, or let's go pursue that. And so I work across spectra. I focus on, as an environmental engineer, heavily on contaminants, but I use biological methods and I use chemical methods to look at those contaminants and how they kind of move through the environment. But I also look at them from the standpoint of how they affect humans, not just the environment, so public health and looking at risk. And then also then, what are the interventions? How can we take what we do in the laboratory and push out? And I'm really, really focused on that part. From the very, very beginning, when I first started, I'm not the kind of person to sit inside at the desk. Even when I worked in practice, I was like, get me out of the pilot plant. I want out of the office. And I always learn that way. I'm a very tactile, hands-on, visual learner. And so I, with my students, give them opportunities to do some of their work outside of the laboratory. I try to make sure every single graduate student has that kind of experience and also has committee members who are not part of the university or the academy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of walk you through some major timelines here. And as I go through that, I'm going to kind of keep on this people first engineering, this notion that if we're going to do that kind of work. Now, environmental engineering, admittedly, has tended to kind of evolve out of sanitation engineering, which was focused on people and how we live in cities together in close density, to really being environmental focused. And I'd say over the last 10 or so, 15 years, we started to move a little more back to, we've always had the public health angle, but more people are able to do that. the funding is separated. You've got National Science Foundation, you've got the National Institutes of Health, you can't cross the lines. So it's always been a little tricky, but I think it's really been interesting to see the evolution of this, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. So for me, oh, it's back. Darn it. I started as a faculty member in 1994, and from at that point in time, I, established my research program, and again, did what I just told you in terms of students were always doing a project out at a treatment plant, some way in which they were interacting with the real world. It was really important to me for them to have that experience. And so during that time, what does that look like? Maybe something like this, where you had students who were outside, they had to build rigs out on the treatment plant. Every one of these images here is somebody doing something and spending extended periods of time outside off campus. That one on the bottom right is a 17-ton pilot plant. There's two students sitting on the right. They operated that thing for a year. It was the best experience for both of them as graduate, because not only did they learn about the science, but they had to make sure the pumps worked and very practical things. But in doing this and sending students kind of outside the university walls into the real world, I always had to take time and space to work with the students to make sure that they understood that when they enter onto a wastewater treatment plant or drinking water treatment plant property, that it is their space, their place. You are a guest, and you have to behave respectfully, and you have to also, beyond that, recognize that many of the people who operate and run that facility that serves you don't have all the educational privileges that you have. In many cases, they don't. And that doesn't mean they don't know really important things that you can learn from. And so this was kind of my approach for many years with my students, and to make sure that they interfaced and interacted with people in the field in a way that was both respectful and gained them a network beyond their student network. And several of them, most of my students stay in the field in practice, and now, bring that into their practice. So that's really important to keep in mind. But then I moved to Michigan, and that was in 2008. And one of the things I'd always wanted to do when I was at Virginia Tech, but couldn't seem to figure out how to do it in a way that I thought would work. Either I just didn't know how to do it. I always wanted to do international work. At that time, the notion of working in communities was really working internationally. And so when I moved to Michigan, I finally had an opportunity to do that. And so I started a relationship with faculty members at Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia in 2012. There was a conference in Kenya, and I thought, well, I'm just going to go. I connected with them, and I said, how about I just visit? No agenda, no expectations. I wasn't asking anything of them. I just wanted to say hello. These were faculty who were used to people coming in and going and so forth. And I didn't want to give them the impression that I was just, I don't know, I just wanted to make sure that we met each other first and shared a meal and so forth. And so I did that. And then pretty quickly after that, there were opportunities to work together. One of the things that really struck me when I went there, we sat in their offices and looked on their bookshelves, and these were faculty teaching the same kind of classes that I teach on water treatment process. And the textbooks on their shelves were the same textbooks on my shelves. In fact, they were the textbooks written by my colleagues and or people in my field. And these were about centralized water and wastewater plants that they did not have. I mean, they had a centralized plant at the time. It's been upgraded, but that plant serves 7% of the 5 million people in Addis Ababa. They upgraded it during the pandemic. Guess what percent it still serves? 7%. And so there was clearly a need to look at decentralized solutions, which serves more than half the world's population. And so we started a collaboration around developing that curriculum and developing a class together, and then put in a grant together and got funding to have students from Addis Ababa University and students from the University of Michigan work together in the summer on projects on smart distributed water systems in Ethiopia. And so we did that for a few summers until the pandemic came along. But it was really a good opportunity for the students to learn how others learn and to expand their networks and hopefully maintain those relationships into their professional lives. But what I noticed was that, I did that without, there wasn't a lot going on that I tapped into in engineering. When I did that work, the people who supported me and my students to develop cultural competency and how to work in a different culture were people in the medical school and public health. It wasn't in engineering. Engineering didn't really have programs to do that, to help us. What's happened here over the last 10 years in particular, I would say, is even within my own college, and this is the current rendering of what we have. This People First Engineering just came out a couple of years ago, but we've been slowly moving towards let's do more that is centered on in service to others. And I think that's wonderful. I'm really happy to see that be the focus for engineering students. I will tell you that the vast majority of engineering faculty are like me and how I was. I had no idea how to perhaps do that kind of work. And I would say it's also the other thing is that this is driven by funding agencies. So the National Science Foundation right now, and the money they give out inordinately, more and more and more of that funding is linked to having partners who are outside of the university walls. And also professional societies. I think all of this is good, but with that comes training, for lack of a better term, and an understanding of how to do that kind of work well. And in my case, I've learned it from people outside my discipline. And part of it I had to, because when I started to do some work outside of the university and in communities, you have to consider protocols that you use and whether they fall under what's called an Institutional Research Board, IRB, or Human Subject Research. I'm not going to spend a lot of detail on this, but the Human Subject Research requirement is a federal requirement led by the Belmont Report, which ultimately was the continuum of work that came out of World War II, recognizing just horrific practices that were happening at that time on humans. And what is ethical research behavior when a human subject is involved? And the core ethical principles associated with the human subject research regulations are respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And what those are is listed here. Respect for persons is protecting the autonomy of all people, respecting the privacy, and allowing for informed consent means a person who's going to be part of a study has to consent to being part of that study and has to have all the information they need to know, whether they can leave the study at any point, who they can contact if they have concerns about the study, et cetera, and what the study is going to ask of them. Beneficence is the philosophy of do no harm while maximizing benefits for the project, but you have to minimize risks to the research subjects first and foremost. And then justice is ensuring reasonable, non-exploitive, and well-considered procedures. What this all means is anytime we're doing work in a community, there are protocols that have to go into place. But the problem is that these processes for IRB, for human subject research, are really designed around, are you taking blood serum from a person and doing something with it? Or are you, something that really affects the person? A lot of the work we might do in engineering in a community doesn't quite come into the same format of what this law was based on. And so we have this federal law and we use the IRB process within our universities for the kind of work that we're now trying to move into with People First Engineering. But we really need a Belmont report for community-based research, and we don't have it in the US. So there's a bit of a gray space sometimes, because when we're working with a community, we're not really, in some cases, we're taking samples, we may have to inform them, or their identity is kept confidential, it becomes exempt. So let me give you some examples. So these are IRBs. I had to learn how to do an IRB as an engineer. And again, I relied upon my colleagues in public health to help guide us in the first few times because our students don't take, there's some classes and it's not part of their normal practice. But now all my students are doing stuff that involve IRB protocols. It's online, it's at the university, there's a board, it has to prove it before you can do any of the work. So for instance, crowdsourcing data with individuals who use their cell phones to record some kind of information about water quality and they submit it. There's no phone number associated with it. You don't have their identity. That would be submitted as a protocol, but the university would tell me it's not regulated. They still want me to submit it as a protocol because they want to know what I'm doing, but it's not regulated under human subject research. Collecting urine from several people, de-identified, using source separating toilets to process it into a fertilizer. Yes, I do that every day. We get 50 liters a week. Ask me later what this is all about. This is IRB exempt, meaning it's good to have the protocol, but because it's depersonalized and we don't know who's doing what, it's considered exempt. I'll skip to the last one. Evaluating the impacts of fixing plumbing on homes of people below the poverty level and impact of repairs on social determinants of health. So we're surveying these individuals. We have information about these individuals and we offer them remuneration, some kind of gift card or something for their time. We pay people for their time for filling out a survey. That is regulated. So anytime you do anything like this, you have to put the protocol through the university to be sure that you are doing it in an ethical manner. But again, we don't have a good standard set for community-based work that is not like really truly human medical subject. So that's a bit of a challenge, but that's what's happening at IRBs across the universities now. So I would argue then that if we're going to do people first work, and we're going to do that by understanding the problems or the challenges or the opportunities of people and moving inside and outside, in particular of the university, that like for us to do an IRB, I told you, I went outside of engineering as a discipline to get assistance and help to work with collaborators. And I worked with collaborators pretty much on every school on my campus at this point in time. I argue that for us to succeed with people first engineering, we have to create teams from multiple disciplines. Train not only our students, but our faculty and staff, and we need to adjust the reward system to reflect this evolving value in being outwardly focused and centered on people first engineering or practices. So I used the word multidisciplinary, but multidisciplinary just refers to bringing together people from different disciplines. There's the concept of interdisciplinary, which now means that you've brought these people together from different disciplines, but now they're interacting intellectually in a way that elevates everybody. And there's another step that's convergence, which is not only do you have multiple disciplines, we're interacting, but we're creating new knowledge, new methods, and new protocols because of it. And so that's this notion of convergence. And that is what is heavily now being encouraged by those who are part of kind of research activities and teaching activities on university campuses. And so let me show you an example of what this might look like and how this might differ. So the graph on the left is a complicated, sorry, my throat's getting dry, image, but it is Flint, Michigan. The different colors reflect zones in the city that are related to the amount of time drinking water spends in the distribution system pipes. So it's called water age. The longer water spends in your pipe, the higher the water age. And I know people have different abilities to see color, but, oops, sorry, let me go back. The darker areas up here are low water age. That's what we want. We typically want the water to spend no more than a couple days between the treatment plant to our tap. And the yellow, pink, and white areas are really high water age. And in the case of Flint, at the time of the crisis and even after for a period of time, those time periods were a couple of weeks. That's unheard of for water age. And the reason that's a problem is because you have disinfectant in the water, and the disinfectant will be gone in a couple days. So now you have water in a pipe with no disinfectant, vulnerable to microbial contamination. This is kind of information that a water plant engineer would know, or an operator might know. But on the right is your typical roadmap and where people live. And so a public health person who's looking at disease data and information might be looking at the map on the right, ignorant and uninformed about the map on the left. And the reason that it's important to know the two together is because of the kinds of diseases that or illnesses that could come because of high water age that the person in public health is unaware of. So here you have multiple disciplines. You have a public health discipline that might be mapping illnesses on a map, and you have an engineer who's mapping hydraulic data. But if you had an interdisciplinary team, they would integrate these two and at least lay them together and talk about the fact that we have high water age in the Southwest. And if you're seeing more waterborne disease-related illnesses in the Southwest, at this time, we should take a look at the water system. They would not know that unless they were working together in a multidisciplinary way. A convergent team would go further. They would create a transparent structure that involves bringing the utility, the public health, the politicians, community leaders, broad representation to create an emergency response plan before a crisis and have it ready in the event of a water line break or whatever might happen. That's one example of something a convergent team could do. So it's really looking holistically at the system and bringing in the knowledge from multiple disciplines. That's what we're being asked to do today. And that's what People First Engineering needs to get to. And to do that, you have to work with people outside of engineering discipline. So what does that require? It requires being able to communicate with each other. It requires being able to know that you have similar values and objectives and protocols. So I'm currently on something called a Convergence Accelerator with NSF. This is a big program they're doing, and I've been in class for a year, learning something called team science, for instance. And I've been doing these things in other ways, but this is really structured, where if you're going to focus on a problem that involves People First Engineering, and you're now working in areas that require other disciplines, I want to emphasize that there is a tendency sometimes for us to think that, well, we'll just go learn that discipline. And I think that's pretty dangerous, first of all, because there's so much knowledge associated with that. But also the discipline also involves subject matter expertise outside the university and outside the academy in the communities that are affected or being served. And so you can't replace that knowledge. That's inherent knowledge. So when you come together, you have to learn how to work together. So identifying values, identifying what is your mission statement as a team, what are the protocols, what are we going to do when we have a conflict? We should be able to work it out, but what is the process? And how are we going to make sure that that process is followed? So there's a whole team science piece to this. But then there's also the principles associated with it. So ethical principles. What are those principles of partnership, for example? And not just what are the principles, but what are the implementation strategies for those principles? And the implementation is really important because when I talk about colliding, that's where it's going to happen. It's how we may have similar principles, but we might implement them in different ways. So in order to kind of look at the latter part, the last two things, well, where do we look? Okay, so I'm an environmental engineer, and these are the four options I have. I have the American Academy of Environmental Engineers and Scientists. I'll show that one in a minute. We have the American Society of Civil Engineers, who has an ethics statement. We have the National Society of Professional Engineers, who has an ethics statement. And we have the American Public Health Association, that has an ethics statement. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the top two, because now we have multiple places to pull from to identify, well, what are the principles that we're going to work with as part of our People First Engineering approach. So the American Academy of Environmental Engineers and Scientists created its first ethics statement in 2022. Well, that may surprise you. It should. That's very late. I co-chaired the committee that created this. And this is simply also just a starting point. There are 4 canons associated with it, and it does not have the implementation plan yet. So this work has to continue. The American Academy of Environmental Engineers and Scientists is important because that is the organization that ABET accredits environmental engineering degrees for anybody who's an environmental engineering undergraduate student. They're the ABET accrediting agency or organization. And they oversee the professional engineering license for environmental engineers. So not ASCE, but AAEES does. I'll point out that under the second canon, they have some words in there, we have some words in there that say protect the public health, human welfare, and the natural environment. So right now you're starting to see this human subject research is really focused on the individual, the human, but community-based work is often focused on the community. So you're seeing here that this protecting public health sounds kind of very community-oriented. And then respect, dignity, and equity has words on respect the dignity of each person. So now you have words that say, but each person and the importance of each person is important in how we set up our protocols. So do we prioritize the community or do we prioritize the person? This is where the conflict starts to come in. Public health has a multiple, like 15-page document. I'm not giving you all that. There's a lot of words here. A lot of the same kind of stuff, but even in more detail, really well established, been in place for a long time, really well established. I will say the second point, achieve community health in a way that respects the rights of individuals. So there you have it again, where the ethics principle emphasizes the importance of the person. So that seems to be consistent between the two. But now let's talk about how when let's say you've gone through this process, you have your principles laid out, you've followed, maybe the AAEES engineering principles, or maybe the public health principles, and you're working with people, not just in your team, but outside. What happens when you get in the field now and you have maybe an urgent situation that you're addressing, like Hurricane Helene came through here and was really very dramatic, and there were a lot of damage and people were harmed, etc. So ethical principles that come from different disciplines don't always align across all implementation scenarios. So there's, in the implementation part of the public health document, it goes on. And one of the things it says is, we can highlight, however, that the interest of the community is part of the equation. And for public health, it is the starting place in the equation. It is the primary interest of public health. So what we see is that in the engineering ethics statements, and you see this in ASC and the NSPE as well, and even in the individuals I know who are practicing engineers, that the importance of an individual's needs can be paramount. What we're reading here may be that the community is paramount if the needs of the individual can cause damage or harm to the community. So what happens when you have a scenario? I'm going to say one more thing. So there's another aspect called clinical ethics. And clinical ethics is practiced maybe more in the medical side, but in public health as well. And the notion is that if there is a risk associated with something, a health risk, and you're going to report information from biomonitoring a person, then that information is from something that has uncertainty around it. It's not regulated. It's not something you routinely monitor, but maybe there's research on it and suggests it's of concern, but it's not required to be reported. There is an avenue and a pathway to not report that if there is uncertainty around it. Community-based participatory research would take a different approach, typically, whereby the individual, you can have aggregate, you de-identify and you can report that information, but to the individuals associated with a study, especially if it's part of your protocols, you report that information. So now you're starting to see where you might have a conflict. So let's talk about a scenario. You're involved with water quality monitoring as part of a support response for a community affected by a disaster. You monitor a suite of water quality parameters, including some that are not regulated constituents, but serve as indicators of whether water quality is good or bad. The results for some households are fine, they're within guidelines, but not for other households, where in your professional judgment, the levels of some of the non-regulating contaminants are concerning. Should researchers provide these results to the community participants? That's where I think some of the challenges come. If not so, how and why? So I'm going to go through that exact example from my experience in the Flint water crisis. So I, after starting the collaboration in Ethiopia, learning a little bit about cultural competency, working in communities that were different from the ones that I had come from, Flint happened, and it started before 2016, but my involvement began in 2016 when the water that the city had been using had been switched to the Flint River. The treatment plant that was used to treat that water had not been used for 50 years. And the politicians had decided to put it back in service for 2 years while they built a pipeline from Lake Huron, which is a very high quality source water, to the city to save money. And by 2016, after lead had been discovered as being in the water, they had switched back to Lake Huron water served through Detroit. So by the time I got involved, they were back on Lake Huron water. But my background is in water quality engineering, and I had been studying for 5 years prior to that point of use filters. If any of you have those little filters, you might screw it on your faucet. You might do a pitcher filter. Those are a little more popular, but they're the same media in some cases as the ones you screw on your faucet. And I've been doing work for 5 years with those, and we were working specifically on how those filters, I started studying them because I was really interested in finding the best place to get microbial growth from a drinking water plant so I could study the bacteria that exist in water. And those point of view filters are a great place to get those bacteria. But they're the same filters that were handed out to 20,000 households in Flint because of the lead. Those filters are really good, and I can tell you after monitoring for now many years now, really good at removing lead. But they collect organic material from the water. That organic material is food for bacteria. There are good bacteria in the water. Most bacteria are really good. And even if there are harmful bacteria, they're in really low quantities, but they can land on those filters and grow. And so we knew that. And so given the deployment, we're asked to provide service to the city and talk to the mayor about how to help provide information about best practices on managing and installing and operating these filters amongst a population that was in trauma. And also, there's another thought, but it left me, so I'll just go on into what these filters look like. So there's a typical point of use filter. You also, same thing in your drinking water fountains here, but they're larger. And if you take one of these filters and slice it in half here, you see there's a annular space in the middle. So the water comes from the outside into the middle and out through that middle channel. This is activated carbon fused together with a polymer, so held together really tightly in that block, that cylinder. But we've taken a lot of filters apart, and that is what a clean fabric, there's a fabric on the outside of the cylinder, and this is what it looks like when it's clean, and this is what it looks like after traditional use, which is 100 gallons. That's a biofilm, and that biofilm is bacteria growing on it. And these are filters from Flint, so they were typical also of what we saw in Ann Arbor, so it wasn't different between the two in terms of seeing the biofilm. And again, if these are harmless bacteria, you won't know any difference. But because the filter also removes disinfectant, there's a reaction that occurs. There's nothing to kill the bacteria. So long story, very long story short, we, as part of our effort to understand what was going on in Flint, and all the work at that point that had been done on point of use filters for a couple decades, and there hasn't been a lot, but all the work that had been done had all been done in laboratories. So here was, you know, in the laboratory said, well, your bacterial counts are going to go up coming out of a filter, and you need to maintain the filter in order to prevent high bacterial counts. Flint is also a city that has the shrinking population, this high water age, and higher bacterial growth. And so it has the ability potentially to have even higher levels of microorganisms. The reason that I was brought on in 2016 around that same time was because by then it had been discovered, or at least revealed, it had been discovered a year earlier, or more than a year earlier, but it had been revealed that while there was a lead release in the city from the corrosion of the lead pipes, that there was a Legionnaire's disease outbreak at the time, the biggest in the United States, very dramatic in 2015, and several people had died. But the focus was on lead, and a lot of people didn't know about the Legionnaire's disease until later. So we were also part of the Legionnaire's disease study group. So long story short, this is another that same map I showed you, but now I've broken it down to census tract, because when we have data that we have to depersonalize, we don't put dots on a map where someone lives. We basically put it down to a census tract, and then we put the data in the middle of that census tract so you don't know whose house it comes from. And what these triangles show you is one kind of bacteria. These are bacteria called Enterobacteriaceae. These are a class of bacteria that in some of the bacteria in this family can cause gastrointestinal discomfort. At the time we started, if it was having a Shigella or a gastrointestinal outbreak. And what we were showing, if you see an orange color or a yellow color on that diamond, every diamond reflects the number of times we sampled a given location. Those yellow or orange numbers say that the number of bacteria were growing or increasing by up to 3 orders of magnitude across the filter because of the filter. If it's blue, it's going down, and if it's white, it's not changing. And we tried to look at that relative to the high water age regions of the city. Admittedly, we don't have good sampling distribution because for a number of reasons. These are volunteers who offered, and you can't, the city was already in a lot of trauma, so pushing for more sampling wasn't realistic. So this is one of the things we were seeing, was that the filters were producing really high numbers of a family of bacteria that was higher than you would normally see in a treated distribution system. And in fact, the filters were changing the quality of the water that they were being delivered. We also knew from other work we were doing, and I do a lot of work with DNA and with other people, but we also knew that in the middle, the blue lines, these are the colors, again, red, yellow means higher numbers of these kinds of bacteria. In some cases coming out of the filters, and these are now pneumonia-causing bacteria. Now, Legionella, we didn't tend to see as many patterns on these filters, but we did with other pneumonia-causing bacteria. And so these are the kind of data we had. And we were sharing them directly with the medical establishment. There was a medical society who we met with routinely. We met with the mayor's office. The mayor had a public health agent in the mayor's office, which is unusual. Usually it's at the county level. We shared it with the state and the feds. We shared it with everybody who was part of the crisis response team. Even though they were all kind of arguing and fighting with each other, everybody had the same data that we had. Later, as part of the study, we published a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences demonstrating through data that the Legionnaire's disease outbreak in Flint was not restricted to one hospital, which remains the position of the State Department of Public Health in the state, but that it was actually broader than that, and that people were at risk in other parts of the city as well. And there was a separate study that was published later that also affirmed the pneumonia risk by individuals at Emory University in Georgia, who got independent studies to show that there were several pneumonia deaths that were not diagnosed as Legionnaire's disease. Legionnaire's disease can only be diagnosed if you give somebody a urine test with an antigen that detects one kind of Legionnaire's disease. There are other kinds that could be missed by it, but oftentimes a doctor doesn't necessarily administer that test. It costs money, etc. And their study showed that there was a dramatic increase in the number of pneumonia deaths in Flint in the first year of the crisis. So we were seeing early phases of this. We had the data that we had. And I also, as a licensed professional engineer, know that the precautionary principle is something that we live by, which is it's a philosophical, legal, and in some cases epistemological approach. It encourages caution when there's a lack of scientific knowledge about a potential harm. It's a risk management strategy that advises against taking action if there's a possibility of harm to the public or environment, and there's no scientific consensus on the issue. So our position remained that biologically the water was unstable, and while the lead levels were going down, we did not feel comfortable declaring that the water was safe, whatever that means, even though we were encouraged and pushed to do that. So what we were told, and I know these are a lot of words, but I want to read them to you. We were asked by state and federal public officials and their agents to not report our biological results to the public or individuals who provided the samples. And these were people who were coming from the public health side of the world, who invoked the notion that it's a damage to the community, even though that there are some individuals who show high levels and there may be risk. So this point about the individual versus the community was coming to bear in terms of the conflict between what we thought was an ethical approach versus what they thought. We were told that the information did not prove risk of harm. It was too complex for the community and that it would elevate community concern unnecessarily. So we worked, as I told you, directly with the city's manager to share all this data. It was actually available to anybody who medically assisted or was part of the city of Flint themselves. And we shared it with the state and federal officials. Despite their opposition to us, we still felt they needed to have this data. We met the requirements of our approved IRB, which required in our protocol that we share the data with the individuals. So they had asked us to violate our IRB, which we would not do. Our local on-the-ground community-based research team members ran separate sessions and conversations to identify questions from the community that needed to be answered. And we provided those answers either in writing, or we worked with them on workshops and various public events to address questions. We worked with the risk communication expert to produce or participate in public sessions, as I said, to share these results, de-identified information. We never identified individuals, emphasize actions individuals could take to reduce risk at home and answer questions. What I learned through my risk communication portion there, the kind of training by fire, tell them what we know and tell them what we don't know. And that is much more transparent and appears, people believe you more when you're telling them, hey, there's stuff I don't know. And that is true. There were things we didn't know. We worked with multiple community-based organizations to produce a train the trainer guide on how to install, operate, and maintain a point of use filter. That guide is now available in English and Spanish on my website and has been shared with a number of communities facing lead crises since Flint. So I share these pictures because it was really this broad, convergent team of people across multiple areas, including environmental activists, water activists, people in the medical society, social workers, people in all kinds of disciplines. Our team had, I think, 20 disciplines represented. We, in the Legionella study that we were doing, we actually ran the office with a 100% Flint resident staff. So in the first year, we had to get the system up and running to monitor for the Legionella, the Legionnaire's disease cases, and just the water quality. But the individuals, we had a partnership with a program that offered opportunities for returning citizens or people who were formerly incarcerated to develop a resume building so that they could build a resume to get a job. Entering back into society, and two of the members of our team, one became a city council member and another one I know was gainfully employed. So it seemed to be very helpful. But we did not go in the field and take the samples. We did not make the phone calls. We did not run the office. Everybody who did that was a Flint resident who was paid. I've since worked with the Flint community schools. So when it comes to lead and the lead and copper rule, it pertains to it does not pertain to schools or daycares. which is mind-boggling, but that's the way the law was written. And if you go into schools, and schools that have older buildings, Flint schools average 75 years. The average school in the United States is about 45 years. The lead levels in the school are exceedingly high. And so they install these hydration stations like you have here. They work remarkably. I've monitored these things multiple times. I have hundreds of samples, never seeing lead breakthrough. And so the point is that just getting to a point where there was demonstration that they were working and hopefully moving towards trust in that water, because while kids spend more time in school, second only to the time they spend at home. So if we can produce water in the schools that we know is lead-free, even if the water at home may not be, depending upon their situation, that's really important to do. And then our point of use lead train the trainer, the picture you see here was as we were handing it off. We didn't do all the trainings. We developed the program and then handed it off to Flint organizations that did the training for neighbors to train neighbors. I don't remember why this, oh yes, how orange, right? Okay, so then 2024 and where we're at now. I've worked in Detroit. I'm an appointed member by the Flint City Council to the Water System Advisory Council, so I'm still in Flint doing work and so forth. So what do we do now? So I'm telling you, oh, you have to develop these protocols, you need principles, you need all this kind of stuff. It's a lot of work. I think institutions really can play a really big role here in stepping in and helping to make that happen. We already have what's called responsible conduct of research mandated by federal government programs, but I think that is only goes so far. Professional societies, as I've shown you, have mission statements and ethics codes. Guidelines for community-based work are really lacking in that. Federal programs are asking them, I'm saying hundreds of millions of dollars now going out and even more to do community-based and bringing community members into our research. But I don't feel like the guardrails are fully there to make sure that we are always doing that well. If we're going to do people first engineering, to do that in an ethical and responsible way, it takes time to develop what I've taken a couple decades here of experience to develop. Thankfully, journals and publishers are now in some cases requiring greater clarity around author roles, including if you publish a study that is community-based, and you need to either have a community-based co-author or a written statement as to why you don't in the PLOS journals, for instance. So I'll close with like, what do I do? So what do I recommend? Take time up front to create your principles and values statement with your students, and for students with yourselves and your collaborators. Be clear about who you are, what you can do. A little bit of impact piece by piece that is reliable and sustained is more valuable than a large number of superficial interactions that do not result in impact or change. So in my team, my students came up with the idea, and I think the students were wonderful in this. We've developed a framework for partnership that is based off of some information that the university has offered for everybody to do. So we have a set not only of principles of, as I say here, recognition, respect, equitable partnership, trust and transparency, justice, empowerment, and community competency, but behind every one of these principles is an implementation protocol that guides us on how do we implement this. We also have our own mission and vision statement, and we established core values. So we did that work as well. And one of the core values is allowing the community to tell their own story in their own voice. These are various pictures of doing that, either advocating for somebody to give a keynote at an international conference where we were going to have yet another keynote about water quality work in Africa given by somebody from North America or Europe. And I said, you know, I know a really great scientist from Ethiopia who I think's got a really great project and is capable of conveying that. So she got to give the keynote. So making sure that we bring on community partners, that they're the face of the project, that they're paid research partners. They end up on the paper with you, as Linda and Victor on the bottom have on our papers. And getting them to come to our conferences, to be able to tell the story that we as researchers often are coming to conference to tell what we did as a researcher, but aren't hearing the community side of it. I think that's an important part of people first engineering, is that the people need to be heard. Be willing to move outside your comfort zone, but be honest and clarify your motives and objectives before engaging. So take the time to prepare. Remember, it's not about you or your ideas, it's their space, their place, and you're a guest. So your subject matter expertise is valued just as much as the community members is, or the expert outside of the university that you engage with. And do not overextend. I see people trying to do a lot of different things with a lot of different partners, and you will eventually run out of time and space to do that. Pick your projects, pick your commitments, and commit for the long term. So with that, I just want to acknowledge that the learning I've done has been because of my students, because of the community members, because of the utility operators, because of the people outside of the university who I've been fortunate to spend a lot of time with, who've helped me think through how I do my work, and you know, really being fortunate, I think, to do that. I also just kind of coming back to that land grant kind of notion, the public institution, the taxpayers kind of really pay into our institution. I think I always, when I went to Michigan, it was different because it's not, it didn't historically have that kind of aura about it as I experienced at Clemson and at Illinois and at Virginia Tech. It's getting there now with this People First Engineering, and I'm really happy about that. But it varies a lot from institution to institution in terms of how much of that mindset is permeated into the institution. So I will end there, and thank you for your time, and I hope we have time for questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Love, for that wonderful presentation, thought-provoking, really giving us a chance to think about people engineering. Thank you. Another round of applause, please. This time, we have the opportunity to ask questions or to discuss further. So myself and Matt are at mics on either side of the room. They are now turned on. So we encourage you all to come forward with questions as you have them.
That was really, really awesome, by the way. Could you talk about the de-identification of information that was required by the IRB? I wanted to ask, do you think it's ever appropriate, or there are ever instances where you want to reach out to an individual, say you have like data from their household and you're like, these hydrological results are like really bad?
So in the case, when I publicly present data, it's de-identified, but the data that I collected from every house, they have that information. Everybody does. Now, that's an easy statement to say. Communicating that in a way that is accessible, it's often scientifically very technical, is very challenging. What I learned was I then started working with some of the community organizers, two of the women on one of these pictures, oops, there, Yvonne on the top right, Yvonne and Karma. Yvonne in particular is a community health advocate, so worked with her so that she served as a bridge. And we also hand delivered as many of the letters as we could so that we could verbally discuss with recipient individuals who had participated in the study, see if they had any questions at that point, leave our business card. Oftentimes people want to call. Maybe you'll get an email, but oftentimes they'll call. So I just want to be clear about that. Everybody who, in my case, when I do stuff like that, they always get a report. We later did a study in Detroit that was focused on water quality in the building scale. And that one we did a better job of our report format. It went through this communication and went through a community. There's a community organization that actually approves our IRB before we even go to the university. They helped us design the report. So one of the things that's really important is in now doing this work, we always design our stuff ahead of time. We know if we're going to take a sample, how are we going to report it? before we ever take a sample. And that was one thing I learned, because in Flint, it was like run out and get the stuff, you know, it's happening so fast, but we don't do that, even if it's a crisis anymore. I now have more frameworks for that. So I hope that helps explain, yeah, okay.
No, actually, I have another question.
Okay.
So when you talk about, okay, I have a lot of questions that might come up afterwards, maybe.
There's anybody else have a question? There's one right here, but you want to go to the microphone? Sure. Or I can, but we like to hear your voice, so.
So what I'm wondering is, with those urine samples you were talking about taking, do you have any specific guidelines with where you get those from? Are they randomized? Or do you try to focus more on areas based off of the water age, like you were talking about earlier?
Right, so let me be clear, the urine is completely separate from the drinking water, okay? So the other side of my life, I focus on recovering nutrients from wastewater. And I can go on for hours, I won't. 80 to 90% of the nitrogen in wastewater comes from your urine. And instead of mixing it with potable drinkable water, adding black water, adding all the other things, contaminating it, sending it through a plant and trying to recover it there, we separate it and then we create a fertilizer out of it. And we do that at my department in Michigan. And there are other people who are expanding this. So for that case, we have in our bathrooms outside the Civil Environmental Engineering Department, a waterless urinal and a toilet. I have no idea who's using them. And it gets collected and turned into a fertilizer. So we've done no work with urine and any kind of other kind of analyses. People do worry about drug testing and other kinds of things that might come with that. That is not something that is even part of our protocol and never done. So I don't know if that gets to your question or not, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sure. Yes.
You had a general complaint about like politicians in regards to like the Flint, Michigan crisis. Would you have any like general tips for like managing patients and like dealing with like levels of bureaucracy? Because I feel like we have multiple different disciplines of engineers,
Yeah.
especially in this room, and how even though we could do really anything on like a project to actually get somewhere, it kind of just gets stopped through levels of bureaucracy. Any tips on just managing things?
Well, I guess it did come across, I was complaining in that particular circumstance, and I think I was, because I want to believe in, and I always give people the benefit of a doubt that they have, you know, the public's best interest at heart, and I think most people do. I still believe that. This was just an egregious case of individuals, and let's take a second and I'll come back to that. This was an egregious case of individuals who knew for 14 months that people had been dying of pneumonia and did not tell the doctors, did not tell the community, kept it hidden. And then the next summer, because Legionnaire's disease happens in the summer, multiple more people died. And those individuals, some of them were charged with involuntary manslaughter. Then those charges were dropped because it was presumed that it was stated that the cases had been charged incorrectly. A new prosecutor came in, recharged them with even higher crimes, used a single person grand jury in the state of Michigan, which the state Supreme Court said was illegal. Every one of those individuals has walked. And now the statute of limitations is passed. So that is an injustice. And I think most people don't know that story. Now, back to your question about bureaucracy. I'm in a university, bureaucracy is alive and well there too. You know, I think I approach things at a very personal level. And I also, and I don't know, I appreciate the frustration because I feel it at times too. What I have found works for me is, you know, all right, I'll admit that I tend to be like, at least within the university bureaucracy, when I run into something, I try to find a way around it that's not illegal, but that somebody else has another path. But I believe in conversation. I believe in dialogue. And it is true that, and I think the case is true in positions people have. I was talking earlier today with some of the students about somebody takes a position because that's the official position of the institution, not necessarily their personal position. So this gets into the morals and ethics, right? So the morals are your personal kind of guiding principles, right? And I think it's really important that we all know what that line is. And so when we encounter something like that, and hopefully somebody who goes into office also has that line, that's one to know what it is for yourself and to challenge somebody if they're not living up to what that line is in a public office. I don't know that I have a better answer than that for you.
Oh, that's a great answer.
Okay.
And then this is my second question, another kind of like general one, or how would you like deal with interdisciplinary differences? Because honestly, like my professor there, Dr. Todd, shout out. Yeah, talked about how like we have different methods specific for like say my discipline ME, where we have methods in approaching like ethics.
Mhm.
How would you like say if I was in a room of like say a civil engineer, chemical engineer, mechanical engineer, how would I approach like getting like a general guideline so that it'd be a lot easier to like complete our goals in a specific amount of time?
Yeah, so when I showed the kind of starting point guidelines that my own group has come up with, my university, and it's open to the public, so my university actually has kind of a starting point template that you can start with and then personalize to your situation. So I would have faith that that's really helpful. We used it and it was really helpful to start with that and then personalize. We also then on our values and mission statement, spent a lot of time iterating on it. So if find yourself at the beginning of the semester, now you've been brought together and you have until December or whatever to finish something and you've got to make this work. It can be feel time consuming to do that, but I can tell you that peace and tranquility and togetherness on a project, is much better than conflict. And so I think it's really worth the time and finding a template that gets you started faster. And if you can't find one here, Google ethics protocol Michigan and you'll find ours, or reach out to me and I'll help you find it. I really do now do this on every project that I work on across disciplines. It's been really helpful. And part of it, especially for faculty who are here and even students who publish, is making publishing statements and agreements. How do we determine who is an author on a publication ahead of time versus after? As a senior person, there can be a tendency for the senior person to kind of take over on this stuff, and then the junior person who put all the time in doesn't get as much recognition as a senior author. We have to have that right up front laid out. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Yes. Go for it. Oh, yeah, we got another question, but go ahead. That's all right. Yeah, no, go for it.
Yes, so I'm a part, to preface my question, I'm a part of a group on Clemson, or in Clemson, that's called Clemson Engineers for Developing Communities. And we have a big focus on avoiding toxic charity. And basically, that's just like making sure that when you work in a community, you're making it so that your solutions are like sustainable for them. They can actually use it and making sure that you build like community resilience so that if a crisis ever does come, they can fix it themselves, basically. And I noticed you talked a lot about how like you involved the community and made sure that they had a part in your like work within them. And I wanted to know if you had like any more things that you could say about that or any advice you could give since you've like spent like a lot of time with this.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question about your organization. So this is like freshmen, multiple year students, and do you have projects that sustain across years, or does it change every academic year?
Yeah, so we like to try to follow like the standard thing where like you have like phase 1, phase 0 and stuff like that. And it keeps going until like I suppose it could like keep going endlessly if like more problems come up, but generally we have like a goal in mind with each project. And we go from like establishing our goals and figuring out how we're gonna get there, stuff like that. So yeah, it continues on. So
my advice, and I know this can be tricky, and this could come into kind of the structure of programs at the university, but it takes time to be in a place where you've heard, you're hearing voices, people are actually speaking up to you. Just because you show up doesn't mean they're going to tell you the truth and what they want you to know. They may tell you what they think you want to know. So that's another one whereby oftentimes, the first interface is not us, but somebody from the community who's an intermediary, who's been there for decades and can serve as a portal to help make sure that you get information that really is the need of the community. So for a student project, I think that kind of a structure may be really helpful because you all graduate and go away. And so the notion of having that relationship that is long held is really hard to do unless there is somebody who maintains that relationship beyond the time of degree. And then if you have that, then I think I think I can feel more confident that the kind of information you're getting really is community driven and that the work you're doing is really going to address the needs of that community. So we have something at, what is it called? I forget the name of it. We have an organization that does that for undergraduate for classes, not for research. And like when we started doing our work in Detroit, I mentioned I work with people at Wayne State, and one of our partners there had been working in this particular community for 20 years. And so he had a really strong foundation with them. And that was the portal entry point where we knew they had a need and we had a potential solution that we could start a dialogue. So just a suggestion, because I think that would be ensure that kind of information is available to you. I think it just takes time. So one example, my student who did that work with the social worker who knew people for 20 years, she had started during the pandemic, and part of her work involved building these boxes that are remotely monitoring water and so forth. Her boxes were built. She built them in my basement during the pandemic because she couldn't get in the lab, blah, 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 long story. But anyway, we got them done. And, but then she was ready to go, but the community wasn't ready to receive us. And because they were, and so we're like, they know Rick, but they don't know us. So we spent the summer at their farmers market having a Ask a Water Scientist table and just talking to the community every Wednesday. And then worked with the local, that community has actually an IRB board within their community. This is very rare, okay? But they had a group of people who, if research was going to be done, it had to go through them. And so we spent another 4 months working with them, presenting our ideas, interacting with them, getting their feedback, developing the project that we collectively wanted to do. And then they helped us hire Victor and Linda, who I've continued to work with Linda now on multiple projects. And they were the face of the project in their own community. It took an extra year for my student to actually start collecting and implementing. She's a graduate student. So I just share that story because part of our values were we had to take the time to do that. And so she spent that year doing modeling work on something else while we were doing this community building work along with our longtime partner, Rick. So, and now we're connected, to them and available as they have needs.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question about testing human subjects and the whole IRB for it. I've never
Yeah.
heard of that before, but I've heard some people say that offering financial compensation to human subjects can be ethically questionable because then you receive more people who may not have wanted to participate off the jump, but then they have maybe they're coerced, maybe they have a financial situation where they feel like they need to participate. And I know your research specifically isn't super invasive, but in things like absorption into skin of certain pollutants and other environmental research. Do you have any opinions on that?
Well, everything we've done, we do use incentives. We pay people for their time. And that's how I view it, is we're paying them for their time. I will say that it's important. We've run into situations where different individuals in a household, you know, fight over who gets the money. And that's really unfortunate and problematic. But I do think it's appropriate to pay people for their time and the value and to not make it a pittance. So, you know, when we did, there was a recent thing we did and our incentive was $150, which a lot of times incentives are like $20 or $15. We're usually trying to make it really, if it's an hour worth their time. It turns out at U of M, if your incentive is over $99, you have to get their social security number, which is a nightmare. And so, you know, I don't know where that is now, but we had to go back and they didn't tell us that at the beginning. And they were accepting our gift card requests, and then we had to go back and get social security numbers from people, which is really hard. So Linda actually did that, but you have to also pay attention to that. So sometimes the rules make it hard to pay people what I think their time is worth. But I do believe incentives, and they have to be meaningful incentives. I think is the way around that. Yeah.
Other burning questions before we close for this evening?
Well, I appreciate all your attention and staying here. Appreciate that. Thank you.
One round.
Oh, because it fit in my suitcase.
It will, you know what, I can promise you it's in here, will fit. That's for that. On behalf of Clemson University, the Rutland Institute for Ethics, and the College of Engineering, Computing, and Life Sciences, thank you for being our 7th annual Ethics Day speaker. We hope you will accept this as a token of our gratitude and excitement. It's always great to have one of our own back. Thank you
so much. I appreciate it.
So a big thank you again to Dr. Love for making this happen. As promised, I have a few announcements for you all before we wrap up. So the first thing you should know is that everything I'm about to say can be found when you connect with us on either LinkedIn or on Instagram. So I encourage you to do that. The first thing I want to talk about is that we hope this isn't the last time that we get to see you. We're hosting another event next Tuesday about apathy to action. So we have an election coming up. We want to think about how are we engaging in democracy, engaging in our communities, which is of course something huge. It's a big part of what Dr. Love talked about as well. So that's next Tuesday, October 29th, 5:30 to 7 in Vickery Hall 100. Both this as well as our event next Tuesday, whether you knew it or not, by attending tonight, you've actually completed some of the requirements to be a part of our Distinguished Ethics Scholars Program. So you can earn a cord or a medallion for your graduation by completing coursework, participating with us at events like this. And it's something that you can put on your resume that said, I really took time to think about my ethical frameworks and to become a better decision maker, increasingly important. As a part of that program as well, we want to let you all know, to save the date, Dr. Jerome Adams, former U.S. Surgeon General, is a faculty fellow for the Institute this year. He will be on campus with us April 1st, so I would go ahead and lock that in your calendar as you can. And my last announcement for this evening is that if you are interested in ethics and ethics education, you want to be a part of these conversations, our Student Ethics Committee Change, which stands for Creating Habits and Norms, Guiding Ethical Decisions, is a group of students who represent every college. We have lots of change members here tonight. If you are a change member, would you please stand so they can see who you are? I knew that there are lots of you. So we have representatives. Oh, yes. We have representatives here from CCAS, from the College of Education, from the College of Science, as well as from the College of Behavioral, Social, and Health Sciences. So these great representatives do all the student-to-student programming and planning. You have at least 2 events a year in your college. So I encourage you to take a peek. And you can also scan this QR code to learn more about what they do, as well as how you can be a part of that. I am their student advisor, so I am very biased. So please come and take a look at that. And with that, I know that many of you probably need this, have wanted this
Thank you for attending. You are able to scan here to record your attendance for this session. If for some reason the glare is off or you can't quite get it, or you need a different kind of link. For those in Zoom, please let me know in the chat. For those of you that are here, there's also a piece of paper on the table out there that you can scan if it's just being weird with the screen. So we really, really appreciate you guys coming. Thank you so much. And of course, happy Annual Ethics Day and go Tigers. Thank you so much.